Hello class, so this is part 2 of your notes on diasporic communities. So I just want to review for you real quickly the learning goal. I can compare and contrast the development of diasporic communities throughout the world due to regional conflicts and changing economic and environmental factors. Yesterday we looked at some of the key terms in the learning goal. We also explored reasons why Scandinavian migration happened, Somali migration happened, and Hmong migration happened, linking those back to regional conflict, economic factors, and environmental factors. The last thing that I had to do yesterday was to write down some of the communities that you were involved with and to indicate what makes that a community, what is your role in the community, how does it feel to be in that community, looking at different like sports teams or church groups or neighborhood groups that you belong to. A great example of that would be Sauk Middle School. We all belong to this community here at Sauk, and it is a different community at Sauk than it would be, say, at Vandenberg. Not to say that you don't have friends from Vandenberg, but if you were to say something like a Sauk Stride, that means something to us. We know what that means. If we talk about History Day, everyone here in the building kind of gets that, or Science Fair. Those are the things that are sort of like unique to Sauk. We all know exactly when second lunch starts, those kinds of things. So it's a community thing that you would know if you were a part of this community. So think about other communities. I always like to think about dance because my daughter does dance, and not even close to like dance competition, but those competition kids, like, wow, the way that they have to get their hair to just be so precise and the way that their outfits are just always perfect. I've got to imagine the community around that, getting everybody ready. What is the norm? How do you fix this? How do you assist other people? Those kinds of things. That would be like another community. I'm assuming that they have, community get-togethers with dance. I've heard about, sleepovers, things like that. So we're going to now be moving on to looking at the community part that exists in these diasporic communities. So again, a diasporic community would be like a community that exists that refers back to the original place, the homeland, but is in the new place. So my example from earlier would be like Chinatown. You can see Chinatown in all kinds of places around the world. In the United States, I know that there's a Chinatown in Chicago, LA, New York City. I've been to the one in Washington, D.C., where you can see Chinese culture everywhere you go for at least a few, city blocks. Chinese cuisine, the use of red as a important Chinese color, Chinese lettering, the Chinese language being spoken. So those cultural components in the new place, that's what we're looking for. So as you look, as I go through the notes, as you write your notes, look for notes that are examples of community. So let's start with the Scandinavian community in Minnesota. So you can see the dispersion of Scandinavians across the country. So remember, Scandinavians would come from Finland, Denmark, Iceland, Norway, and Sweden. Sometimes you can kind of think of like Poland and Germany as being kind of lumped into that too, just because they're sort of close to Scandinavia. Even if you don't lump them in, Poland, Germany, and Ireland, they kind of went through the same sort of challenges, those push-pull factors, as the Scandinavian community did. So you'll see some connections there too. So some things that happened in Minnesota with the Scandinavian community to try to hold on to that sense of like who we are, that connection to the old place, that sense of belonging, is that they made newspapers in the language of their homeland. Very high literacy levels among the Scandinavian communities, so that was a great way for them to stay connected. They also had churches in the native language. My husband talks about how his grandma went to a church and she didn't speak the language, but the whole church was just in Norwegian. She didn't speak Norwegian, but her parents did, and so she was always kind of feeling a little bit lost. Social activism, very much involved in politics, in pushing for labor movements, getting involved in politics. Walter Mondale, Hubert H. Humphrey, Warren, those are probably some politicians that you've heard of, especially those that are coming specifically from Minnesota. Education, very much involved in the education process, even so much as to have established an actual Scandinavian college in North Dakota. And then also social clubs, things that were fun, get-togethers where people would sing together. They had choirs, sporting events where they would get together and play, the local sporting things. And then the Swedish Vasa Order, this was a social welfare program that provided assistance for people in need that was sort of locally established. All right, so next we're going to look at the Somali community in Minnesota. Where we see Somali communities thriving is in the Minneapolis Cedar Riverside neighborhood and then in St. Cloud. So one thing that Somalis have done is to have established many local businesses, entrepreneurs, lots of small businesses, and Somali businesses are often supported by Somalis. They frequent each other's establishments and try to provide support to one another that way. They also send money back home to Somalia. So if you remember our earlier conversation about movements of people, that would be called remittances. It's something that can help to stimulate the Somali economy back home and provide for much needed funds for family who are maybe not doing so well in the homeland. Also very socially activated, unfortunately, after September 11th, because many Somalians are Muslim as well. They're very closely connected to their religion. After September 11th, there was a lot of anti-Semitism directed at the Somali community, very unfortunately. And so they have sort of taken that power back and have fought against that racism that they have been the target of. So in doing so, they have become very socially involved in pushing for legislation that benefits Somali Americans who are being attacked. Also looking at Somali Americans that have been involved in the political process. Ilan Omar being the first Somali American to serve in the U.S. Congress. She comes from Minnesota. She's also the first African to have served in the U.S. Congress. So that's kind of important. So other things that Somali Americans do to hold on to their sense of community, they celebrate Somali Week. This is celebrating Somali independence from Italy. They had been colonized by Italy, as many African nations were colonized by European powers in that time of imperialism, where the European powers would come in and exploit the resources and divide the already established clans and kingdoms of Africa. So celebrating Somali independence, during this time they get together, they celebrate by waving the Somali flag, engaging in dance and poetry, traditional songs, and then traditional foods. And then social services also, a couple provided below here. The African Development Center is interesting because many Somalis, as I said, are also Muslims, and they're not allowed to sort of pay interest on loans. And so that can be really difficult for them to have mortgage payments and those kinds of things. So this helps to establish some line of credit where they can finance a home without having to compromise in their belief system. Next, we have the Hmong community in Minnesota. This is one of my favorites just because I grew up with my best friend and my sister's best friend were Hmong, so we were often invited to some of these Hmong events, especially Hmong New Year. My sister did the traditional Hmong dance, and she was, like the only blonde-haired girl in the crowd, and it was a lot of fun. I've always enjoyed a lot of the Hmong culture, especially the traditional clothing. Super beautiful. So I might spend a little bit of extra time talking about this one. So anyway, we talked about the Hmong people being a ethnic group originating out of several countries in East Africa. A lot of the Hmong in Minnesota traditionally come from Laos and Thailand. Originally migrated here to Minnesota, but also to California, and there's still a large Hmong population in California. One of the traditional Hmong events would be the J4. This is the 40th anniversary of the J4, which is like this big get-together where there's picnics and food, and it's a sporting event, lots of different sporting events going on. A couple here that I think are just interesting to read or learn more about. So I'm going to play you some short video clips about some of the traditional Hmong sporting events that happen at the J4. Unfortunately, this year, the 40th anniversary was canceled due to COVID. So let me just real quick, this is one of the sporting events that I always found so cool. We can take a brief look at it.
Is curious, of course. What exactly is Tulu and how is it played? So we dispatched David Gillette to find out. If you want to play a sport with deep cultural history,
this is we call a Tulu.
can't do much better than Tulu.
Yeah, it's very important to us.
Tulu, which is essentially the throwing and knocking of tops, has been played by Hmong athletes for over 5,000 years.
It's a little bit like half of football.
And today, you can play it right here in St. Paul, Minnesota.
All right, so I think that is interesting to look at the cultural components of, oh yeah, so here's the notice that it's been canceled this year. Also, there's another one that I think is kind of fun. I gotta find the, here we go. Kind of like a take on soccer, volleyball. Yeah, so you would have to be extremely athletic and flexible. So that's one thing that the Hmong community does to try to maintain that sense of community, that connection back to the home place. I talked a little bit about Hmong New Year, religious and cultural gatherings, food, dance, music, ritual. My best friend's older brother would drive us to school every day and would just blast Hmong traditional songs on the radio all the time. So, fun stuff. Naming of children, birthdays, and weddings are very important in Hmong culture. Death is something that, where we think of like a funeral traditionally might take a day or two, is a very long, drawn-out process for Hmong people. It's very sacred. Hmong people will travel very far to be there for the celebration of the passing of the life. And then healing rituals as well. So looking at how the Hmong community has held on to who they are in the new place with a very large cultural presence here in Minnesota that I always just found super cool. All right, so learned a little bit about Scandinavian community, learned a little bit about Somali community, learned a little bit about Hmong community in Minnesota. So you have one last job to do after taking these fine notes. It's your exit question. So you can just do this right on the same page as your notes, and then we will be submitting notebook checks at the end of the week. So questions for you to be thinking about. If you migrated to a new country, why might you feel drawn to people like you, like from your community, from the same place, from your homeland? What would be important to you? So provide 3 examples about why would that be important? What kinds of things would you look forward to doing or being a part of with people who come from the same place as you do? So brief little exit question there. And then tomorrow you will be introduced to your final exam. It will be a project where you're going to describe a diasporic community from another group of people. Look for a video lesson to be coming to you tomorrow about that. As always, if you have any questions, please send me an email and have a great day.